Good morning, everyone. This is Sarah with the Pickaway County Library, and I'm here to bring you our baby toddler story time. We're going to start out with a song that you may already know called Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Are you ready to try with me? Here we go. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Up above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Good job. Do you want to try doing some of the hand motions with me? We'll do it one more time together. Are you ready? Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Up above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. Good job. The next thing we're going to do today is read our story together. Our book today is The Adventures of Granny Clearwater and Little Critter. It's written by Kimberly Willis Holt. We're reading today's book with permission from Macmillan Publishers. The Adventures of Granny Clearwater and Little Critter. One day, the Clearwater family decided to head out where the sun sets, that place called the West. With Ma by his side, Pa drove the wagon. The older Clearwater children walked, while Little Critter and Granny rode in the back. For miles and miles, the land was as flat as Ma Clearwater's burnt corn cakes. But all of a sudden, the wagon hit a big hole. Pa snapped the reins extra hard, and those horses commenced to running. The jolt was so rough that Granny and Little Critter shot out of the wagon like cannonballs. They flew through the sky for almost a mile until they landed stuck to a prickly pear cactus. Granny kept napping as if nothing had happened, but Little Critter's eyes popped wide as he watched his family's wagon disappear from the horizon. When Granny awoke and noticed their predicament, she swung loose of the cactus, needle snagging her blouse. Then she pulled Little Critter from the cactus with one swift yank. Little Critter's behind looked like a pincushion. Granny plucked each needle and rubbed some prickly pear juice over the bumps. Sizing up the situation, Granny said, "We'll stay put so your Pa can find us." Then she remembered. Ever since Pa got hit on the head during a cow pie toss, he'd confused north, south, east, and west. "Well," said Granny, "sooner or later we're bound to find them." Each day, Granny and Little Critter walked across that leave-your-mouth-scorchin' dry prairie heading west. They got so thirsty, Granny had to do a rainwater dance, taught to her by her grandpappy with itchy feet. Why, that desert had never seen such a downpour. They became so hungry they could have eaten Granny's boots. Instead, they ate fried prickly pear cooked over mesquite. Finally, trees replaced cactus and mesquite. Granny and Little Critter got a hankering for something more than fried prickly pear. So when they came to a lake, their tongues went to hanging like half-starved hound dogs. Granny snapped 2 limbs off a tree, pulled the thread from her shirt hem, and bent 2 hairpins into hooks. Then she showed Little Critter how to dig for worms. Soon they were dipping their lines into the lake. Every time Little Critter felt a tug, it turned out to be nothing more than a turtle nibbling. But Granny, now that gal could fish. She'd learned how many years ago from her ma. Granny caught one trout after another. And when a fish pulled so hard that it dragged Granny into the water, she kept a-holding on. The fish took Granny around and around the lake until it wore plumb out. Then Granny swam to the bank, pulling the fish behind her. That night they ate until their bellies swelled as big as melons. When they'd gone a spell, Little Critter pointed to something humongous shooting up through the clouds. It was taller than a giant and wider than 1,000 women wearing hoop skirts. "Yonder is a mountain," said Granny. "We'll have to cross it." During their journey, they stumbled across a sign posted on a tree. Granny read aloud so that Little Critter could understand. "Wanted, Rose Rogers, stagecoach robber and bad poet. Reward $100. Granny Clearwater frowned at the man's picture. "He's uglier than a mud fence," she said, "and I never could stand a bad poet." Ah! A second later, they saw what all the commotion was about. A man with a rose between his teeth was holding up a stagecoach. Every person stood outside with arms pointed toward heaven. Granny took off her stockings, all 17 pairs. Little Critter pulled off his stockings, too. Granny tied them together and swung them above her head. She'd learned to lasso from her grandma, Colleen, when she was just a wee tot, about the same age as Little Critter. All the women in her family could handle a rope, pert near as good as a snake charmer handles a rattler. The stockings sailed through the air and spun faster than a windmill on a windy day. Just as the folks were about to hand over their money and jewelry, Granny's lasso slipped over Rose Roger's head and slid past his belt buckle until it reached his knees. Then Granny gave the rope one strong tug. Rose Rogers fell to the ground before you could say peanut brittle. The folks cheered. Flat on his back, Rose Rogers began to recite, "Oh, wisp of a woman with gray hair, her roping talent is surprisingly a scare." Little Critter didn't particularly take kindly to bad poetry either, so he crawled over to Rose Rogers and bit one of his ankles. That shut him up all right. Granny and Little Critter rode in the stagecoach. When they arrived at town, the sheriff threw Rose Rogers in jail and presented the reward money to Granny and Little Critter. He even named them honorary deputies. When Granny told him they were trying to meet up with the family out west, the sheriff gave them his quickest pony. It seemed like everybody in that little town wanted to send a letter to someone heading west. With all the mail they had to carry, there was barely room for Little Critter. Granny jiggled the reins, and that pony took off like a pebble snapped by a slingshot. They crossed the mountain, then made their way through a valley, stopping only long enough to deliver the letters. Why, you'd never seen such a pony express. All the time they kept their eyes peeled for the rest of the Clearwater family, but they didn't see hide nor hair of them. Finally, they reached the west and stopped at a place called California. A bunch of folks out there were panning for gold. Years ago, Granny's great-uncle Corky had shared his panning secrets with her. So with Little Critter by her side, she picked a spot upstream and heated her frying pan over the water. That frying pan grew so hot it dried up the stream and melted the gold nuggets into a beautiful liquid that flowed down smooth as syrup into Granny's bucket. One day, when Little Critter was making mud pies, he heard a whistle that sounded familiar, though he couldn't rightly say why. He looked way off to where the land and the sky touched and noticed a wagon. He ran to fetch his Granny. She could spot a mosquito landing on a fence post a mile away. "That's your Ma and Pa," she shouted. Sure enough it was. Ma and Pa and the other Clearwater children took turns squeezing Little Critter. A few months had passed since they'd seen him last, and they'd missed him something fierce. "How'd you find us?" asked Granny. "Well," Pa said, "I took a shortcut. I knew we'd meet up sooner or later." "It looks like it's time for a house raising," said Granny. Her Aunt Carleen had taught her a thing or two about using a hammer and a saw, and that day, Granny passed those tips down to the rest of her family. The Clearwaters began to build their home like a mess of busy ants forming a hill. Even Little Critter helped. When their home was finished, Granny plucked a banjo she'd learned to play from her pa. Little Critter banged a spoon on the bottom of an old kettle. Everyone else danced until the sun sunk low in the sky and they had worn holes in their stockings. The Clearwater family had finally settled out west together. The end. I hope you enjoyed our story today. Thank you for reading along with me. This book and lots of others are available in the Youth Services Department and are ready and available for pickup or to be placed on hold. So get online or come in and see us and choose some books to read at home. The next part of our story time today will be using our sensory items. In our sensory items today, we have some bubble wrap. It can be any size or shape. You can use small bubbles or big, your choice. And some toy cars. These can also be small or large, whatever you have available. This is a very simple sensory activity that you can use inside or outside. First, you're going to take your bubble wrap and lay it down on the floor as a road for your cars. You can choose to add some painter's tape along the edges to keep it from slipping if your little one can walk so they don't fall. Your little one can then use the toy cars and drive them along the bumpy road. They can walk, crawl, or sit on the bubble wrap to feel the texture and feel the bubbles pop underneath them. You can keep this activity out until your little one loses interest or until all the bubbles are popped, whichever you would prefer. For our activity today, we'll need a small flower pot or a cup, some Play-Doh, and some pipe cleaners cut into smaller pieces. Let's take a look at what we're making today. The first thing we're going to do is make sure we have some Play-Doh, a little pot for a plant, or even a small cup, and some pipe cleaners cut into smaller pieces. You're going to use your Play-Doh, any color you would like, and turn it into a cactus shape. I have done one here in a pot, and you use those pipe cleaners as spines and you just stick them in there wherever you would like. There's really no particular pattern to cactus spines. They can go in whatever order, and you can use whatever color pipe cleaners you have available. And then I have also done a smaller one here, not in a pot, just a little cactus shape with some spines poking into it wherever you would like. You can add as many of those as you would like. Your little one can feel the textures. There's pointy ends on the ones that you've cut. These ones are not pointy because I have folded them in half. So it's just the little loop there on the top to keep it from poking any little fingers. And you can take these out and rearrange your cactuses as much as you would like. We would love to see what your cactus looks like. This is also a great chance to count these spines and name your colors as you go, and just to feel the textures of the Play-Doh and the smells of the Play-Doh as well. We hope you enjoy this one. For our craft today, we'll need 5 popsicle sticks, a piece of string, a piece of white paper, and something to draw or color with, like crayons, markers, or colored pencils. Let's take a look. The first thing we're going to do is take our 5 popsicle sticks and put them together in a house shape, just like this. So we have 2 on the sides and then 1 across the bottom, and then the other 2 make the top of the house right there. You can choose to color these with markers, or you can just use them plain. They don't need to have any color, and these are just glued with a couple dots of glue on the corners where they meet. Next, you'll need to measure your white paper underneath. So this is an easy way to figure out how big of a space to allow your little ones to draw in. You can trace the outside of the house and make a line on the inside. And I have done this on the reverse side for you. So it looks something like this. This will allow you to use this space on the edges to glue or tape it to the back of your house back here. Now you will cut this out and your little one can draw a picture in the middle. This does not have to be anything fancy. I do have one already put together for you. When they're done drawing, you just cut it out, lay it underneath your house, and you can glue or tape that right in there. And you can punch a small hole in the top and add a string there if you would like to hang it up. You do not have to do that if you don't like to, or if your paper is shorter and only comes up to here, you could just tie it around the top and hang that up. This is a nice little family portrait piece. Your little ones can choose to draw their family or their pets or your home. We would love to see what you come up with if you would like to share your pictures with us on Facebook. I hope you enjoyed our story time today and that you'll join us again next week as we continue to read and learn together.